My mom's cooking is way better than yours. While some leaned back on the dining chair and others sat straight up, the four gathered around a table laden with lavish dishes. Normally, we wouldn't go for such an extravagant meal, but today was the day to dine together at the in-laws. Under such circumstances, Keith looked my way, a crabbed smirk spreading across his face even while eating. That was made by me, though, isn't it your usual mistress whose cooking is awful? My words spilled out as if to respond to Keith's remark. I then glanced towards my parents-in-law, gauging their reactions. Excuse me? My parents-in-law wore puzzled expressions. Furthermore, a tense atmosphere began to pervade the room. For a moment, it seemed time stood still and everyone present was unable to move or speak with their forks in their hands. I thought there was no longer a need to hide. I didn't want to continue relationships with Keith and his parents while being the only one harboring such unpleasant feelings. I had all I needed to counterattack. I had planned to take revenge on Keith at today's gathering for quite some time. That's why I had left our daughter, Naomi, with my parents. I didn't want to show her this ugly side. I didn't want to traumatize young Naomi. In this conversation, I must be going to achieve my goal. I was laughing up my sleeve. My name is Rachel Davis. This year I turned 34, and my daughter Naomi started elementary school. I'm a typical housewife, able to live without any inconvenience. Though I expressed myself as typical, I married a man from a wealthy family. So, I can afford a certain degree of luxury. However, I had no desire to be excessively greedy. As long as I could live happily with my husband, Keith, that's all I wished for. Generally speaking, people would think we're living happily. But, there was one thing that had been bothering me. It was that Keith, who turned 39 this year, had been coming home late recently. Coming home late at night had been normal since we got married. Keith works at a well-known company, and I had heard that he's been entrusted with significant work. Considering his position, I thought there must be circumstances that didn't allow him to return home early, so I followed Keith's stance, not throwing unnecessary words at him. Moreover, Keith would think about his daughter on his days off and sometimes take the family on trips. Keith had not complained since we got married. Even though he usually accumulates stress from work, he tries so hard. I thought I shouldn't cast unwarranted suspicion like infidelity on someone like him. In an ordinary family, complaints and stress can sometimes lead to arguments between couples. That wasn't the case in our home. Furthermore, Keith didn't have bad habits, such as being mean drunk. He was rather a respectable figure. I sometimes looked at Keith with impressed eyes, thinking that if you were born into a good family, you would have good sense. However, since this year, something seemed off. There were times when he replied nonchalantly even when I brought up topics. Lately, Keith has been looking at his smartphone more and our conversations have been dwindling. But it might have been a work meeting, so I didn't interfere unnecessarily or ask about it. One day's incident. On a weekday evening, our daughter Naomi came home from elementary school. Daddy was with someone I don't know. What? Hearing Naomi's statement, I, who was in the kitchen preparing dinner, stopped my hand that was holding the knife. What do you mean? I didn't want to ask Naomi about such things, but in addition to Keith acting strange recently, I had some doubts. I wanted to satisfy my curiosity. That's why I thought I'd try to find out a little more from Naomi's information. What kind of person was it? A woman I don't know. I see. How old do you think she was? Probably about the same age as you, Mom. I see, okay. With that extent of information, I can't know if Keith is cheating. Keith has a high position, so there were possibilities he was only instructing work to a woman. But what is this feeling? Being troubled by this constricting emotion, I decided to go to a certain place tomorrow. I'm sorry for suddenly all this. No, it's all right. I've pretty much understood about your husband. So, what exactly would you like me to investigate? Well, while I was sitting on the couch lost in thought, Timothy, sitting on the opposite couch, spread some documents on the glass table in front of me. We have this plan where we take evidence photos, or our staff directly interact and get close to your husband to gather information, and then, well. Timothy was explaining the details of the plan carefully. If that's the case, I'd like to go with this option. I pointed to the plan written in the documents, nodding in agreement. Right now, I'm in the city. I had visited a detective agency located in a back alley not far from downtown. The man sitting across the table, dressed in a black suit, is Timothy Rogers, the detective assigned to my case. I've been worried since yesterday. Unable to shake off the nagging suspicion that Keith might be cheating on me, I decided to turn to a professional detective. I didn't want to doubt my husband, with whom I'd shared my life for several years. But it wasn't something I could discuss with just anyone. However, the desire to uncover the truth prevailed, and I explained the situation leading up to this moment. So, what kind of job does your husband typically do? He's a managerial position in sales at a major corporation. A manager, like a department head or something? Yes, something like that. But I'd rather not disclose the company's name at the moment, is that okay? It's a well-known corporation, and I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. I didn't want to involve people who had nothing to do with what was happening between Keith and me. I understand. Depending on the situation, we might need it, but as much as possible. Just to confirm, does your husband usually work at the company's main office or a sales branch? I believe it's the sales branch, I said, trying to recall. I see. If he's working at the company, I'd like to know the name, of course. If you promise not to tell anyone, I'll let you know. With a nervous expression, I took a pen and quickly wrote down the name on a notepad that Timothy, in a suit, had placed on the table. This company is pretty big, or should I say well-known, right? Yes, that's why I didn't want to mention it. Could you please not tell anyone else? Understood. We don't want to harm the company in any way. This is strictly a personal matter. Timothy nodded slowly, took a deep breath, and resumed our conversation. 2 weeks have passed since then. I visited the detective agency again and met with Timothy. I'm really sorry to have to tell you this, but your husband is cheating. Oh, is that so? My eyes widened in surprise, and at the same time I muttered as if I had given up. To be honest, I was suffering. The slight possibility had now turned into a more certain reality, making my heart ache even more. Yet, there was a sense of duty within me that I needed to accept the truth. It was this mix of feelings that kept me seemingly composed. What are you going to do next? Continue the investigation a bit more? Yes, please. That means we would be more deeply involved. Are you sure about that? Yes. Although I felt like my heart was sinking into an abyss, I wanted to reveal the unseen, so I nodded slowly. So, the affair is confirmed at this point? Yes. And it's hard to say, but there were times when your husband lived with the woman he had the affair with. I see. There were times he didn't come home lately. Not for work reasons, but rather to spend time with his mistress. This pretext he had made anger surge within me. Do you want to see the photographic evidence now or later? You can also choose not to see it. Show it to me. Are you sure? Yes, please show it to me. I responded with a trembling voice. Timothy took out a photo from a brown envelope and handed it to me. I took it and saw Keith entering his mistress's house. What Naomi had seen wasn't a lie. She seemed to be around my age. Yet, she appeared slightly younger. She was an attractive woman, and Keith seemed to smile more with her than with me. Naomi was just in first grade, and I didn't want to divorce, but I also didn't want to be with a cheating husband. If the affair affects Naomi negatively, it would be too late. I looked at the photo again, suppressing my pain, and made up my mind. I need as much information as you can provide. All right, then. We'll proceed with an investigation for about 2 months. Is that okay? Yes. I have enough money, so please, I need you to do this. I looked Timothy in the eyes and spoke. Hey! Don't you go saying things on your own. All you do is lie. No, it's the truth. I am now at Keith's parents' house. Since Naomi isn't here, I can respond fully to Keith's comments. I've not lied nor deceived my parents-in-law. What's wrong with telling the truth? Besides, there's no benefit for me in doing that. A few days before coming to my parents-in-law, I received a report from Timothy that the investigation was completed. All the information from that detective was in the bag next to me. Keith can't deny it, and once the evidence is presented, His parents should understand. But I needed to be deliberate since Keith was such a man who deceived his close one. I thought of revealing the truth to his parents while observing the situation. "You're crazy. My son would never cheat. You just keep lying, just like Keith said. And it's rude to make false claims in front of him." Inside the room, Robert's shouting voice echoed. Just moments ago, the four of us were having a pleasant conversation, but a minor exchange between Keith and me escalated the situation, and now the atmosphere was tense. I only mentioned that Keith hadn't been coming home for the past 6 months, but he immediately got defensive and accused me of lying. It was me who triggered this. But my resentment towards my husband was profound. I had come to this gathering with feelings of revenge. "According to my son, you can't even manage household chores properly. You're just at home and yet you don't do anything." That's what Keith said. "That's a misunderstanding," I replied firmly. "Misunderstanding? Are you suggesting my son is lying?" "Yes." I continued speaking, pushing down my feelings, looking into Robert's eyes, even though his expression was intimidating. "That's ridiculous. My son is elite. I've always provided him with a good education and quality meals. Moreover, I've taught him to be respectful and not to be a bother to others. Do you think someone like him would cheat? Impossible." Robert was stubbornly refusing to acknowledge what Keith had done. It was probably because he didn't know the facts that he wouldn't accept them. But Robert's attitude was becoming increasingly tense. I was about to show that evidence and reached for my bag when, "I used to trust you. But after this incident, I just can't anymore." Susan was still a kind person. Even today, when I arrived early at their home, she had been kind. It was Susan who recommended Keith to marry me. Susan and my mother were old friends, so that was one of the reasons I was treated with kindness by her. However, Susan now looked at me with suspicion, as if she was looking at a criminal. "If it's that bad, we might have to consider divorce," Susan said, almost sighing. I didn't want to mention divorce. Our family runs a well-known company. If people find out that someone like you is my son's wife, and in about 10 years, Keith will become the CEO, we won't be able to speak of it openly then. Susan continued her words straightforwardly, though her expression was apologetic. "Also, she cheats. And she doesn't even cook properly for me." "That's not true. I cook properly." "Really? Your cooking tastes bad." In the room where the four of us were, Keith picked up his fork, looked at the spread of dishes on the table, forked a piece of grilled fish, and began eating. His arrogant attitude irritated me even more. "Actually, my mom's cooking is way better than yours," Keith said, laughing. "What? That was made by me, though. Isn't it your usual mistress whose cooking is awful?" I muttered, being stunned. At that remark, the atmosphere in the room became tense. "Excuse me?" Both sets of parents-in-law who were present looked shocked, their mouths hanging open. Keith also widened his eyes, dropping the grilled fish he had picked up with his fork onto the table. "What do you mean?" "Just what I said," I replied smoothly to Susan's question. "As I've been saying, the one lying is my husband." "Hey, stop making stuff up!" Keith slammed his fork on the table, yelling. "It's not a lie. Plus, I cooked the grilled fish after I came here this morning, in place of your mother. You and your father wouldn't know since you arrived in the afternoon." As I explained, Keith seemed even more irritated and his face began to turn bright red. "Want to see the evidence?" "Evidence? If you have it, show it." Keith, who had been leaning at the backrest, stood up. "All right. I'll show you then." "What? No, you must be lying. That's just nonsense." "It's not, I'm serious." I looked at Keith with a more serious expression than usual. "Well, anyway, I haven't done anything wrong, you know." Saying that, Keith sat back down quietly. "You know what'll happen if you're lying, right?" Robert shouted. "First off, calm down. Does Rachel really have evidence?" Susan tried to calm the furious Robert down. In this setting, Susan was the only one able to think rationally. I took an envelope from my bag next to me and placed photos that serve as evidence along with a letter-sized paper I got from Timothy, the detective, on the table. I could see my husband's face turning pale as he watched my move. "No, it's not like that." Keith seemed desperate to avoid confronting the truth, repeatedly denying it. "What is this? What does it mean?" "It's nothing, nothing," Robert demanded, but Keith covered his ears. "What are these? These photos, who's this person? Don't tell me you've really been cheating?" I explained in response to Robert's remarks. "Yes, that's right. That's why I had these photos taken as evidence. This isn't fabricated. I've also consulted with an attorney, so if we decide to divorce, it'll be handled according to the law." I spoke without any hesitation. I had a deep-seated intention to make Keith pay. This could tarnish my company's reputation. The tone in Robert's voice grew weak. The momentum he had earlier seemed like a distant memory. "What's the truth?" "It's not my fault. It's..." At Susan's question, Keith covered his face with both hands, not wanting to accept reality. However, he could no longer avoid the undeniable truth. Keith's distressed expression began to show, but slowly, it was evident he was regaining composure. "All right. I'll talk." Keith slumped, seemingly exhausted. I. Keith struggled to find words. "I did cheat, but it's not entirely my fault." From the beginning, Keith tried to justify himself. "I originally had someone I loved." "Loved?" "Yeah." I had never heard Keith mention this before. "Since when?" "Before I met you. Before Mom introduced you to me." "So, why did you choose me?" "Because it looked good socially." Keith spoke with difficulty. Then, Keith looked at his parents. "What do you mean by that?" "Dad wanted me to get married soon, so I was set up with someone Mom recommended." "So, why, if you loved someone, why didn't you tell me?" "You would have criticized me." "Then, who is it? Who's this person you love?" Robert was furious. The suspicion he had towards me was now directed at Keith, demanding the whole story, banging the table with his right hand. "It was someone I met about 10 years ago. She worked at a nightlife spot. Given that my father runs a major company, I couldn't openly discuss it." "I see, a nightlife spot. Well, in that case, I probably would have opposed the marriage, indeed." "Right, Dad? So, it's not entirely my fault. Actually, I wanted to marry her." Keith admitted, revealing a truth I'd never known. I was speechless. We'd lived together for several years, even had a child, but all this time, Keith never truly loved me. It hit me hard. "She told me it'd be okay if we got married this year. So, I thought this was my chance." "Chance? Chance for what? What are you talking about?" Susan, who had been listening intently, asked. "It was my last shot at marrying her. Plus, I thought if I badmouthed Rachel, Dad and Mom would agree to our divorce. I'm sick of it all, the societal expectations and all that. I just want to live a simple life. I'd rather spend my life with that woman than with our family." I'd never heard Keith speak like this before. I felt a pang of sympathy for him, realizing he had been shouldering stress all these years for our family. However, it dawned on me that our relationship was merely a stepping stone for him. When I realized that our relationship was just a facade for the sake of appearances, without a shred of genuine love, it became increasingly painful. "So, what are you gonna do about your marriage?" I'm gonna get a divorce." "Do you have any idea how much money I've spent on you?" Robert's anger escalated. "Hey, stop it!" "What? You're taking his side now?" "It's not that, but we've never heard the true feelings from him. He's always followed our advice and did the right thing, even back in his college days." "Well, what about my business?" "I won't accept it unless he marries someone suitable." Robert's fury toward Keith showed no sign of abating. "I'm sorry." Keith's voice quivered in pain. "Just saying sorry won't cut it." "But, don't you think it's enough? He's finally been honest with us." "But..." Robert, with Susan's gentle prodding, began to calm down emotionally. I'm getting a divorce. So, taking over my company? What is your answer? With an angry expression, Robert retorted to Keith in a stern voice. I can't take it over anymore. I see. So, are you prepared to take full responsibility? As if seeking a final confirmation, Robert asked. It might be tough, but I'll figure something out. Then, do as you please. I won't say a thing. Do whatever you want. From today, you're no longer part of this family. Remember that. In disbelief, Robert left the dining table and exited the room. I'm truly sorry. Keith expressed a deep regret to me. He was begging for my forgiveness. But no matter the circumstances, I couldn't forgive Keith for upending my life. I was set on getting a divorce and planned to get child support. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to suppress my feelings of resentment. I called the attorney I had spoken with earlier that day, and the divorce proceedings with Keith began the next day. A few months have passed since then. I believe my life has improved. Though I can't live as comfortably as before. Yet, I feel better about my current situation. Mom, I'm off. Be careful, honey. Yep. Naomi is now in the 2nd grade of elementary school. I'm living as a single mom. I had to start working again, but it was still better than living with Keith, who had no love. After ensuring Naomi's headed to school, I go off to work. The company I work for is managed by my father-in-law. I reconciled with my parents-in-law, and they've helped me in various ways through work. It turned out that most of the things Keith had been saying were lies, and his parents constantly said sorry for it. With their assistance, I was able to join this current company. However, I didn't know what had become of Keith after the divorce. After we formally divorced, Keith went to the person he had an affair with and never returned to his family home. Keith had always had a decent amount of money. So, the child support was paid promptly. Later on, through the grapevine, I heard of someone resembling Keith wandering the streets at night alone. Apparently, he looked haggard with a pained expression. I didn't know what relationship Keith had with the person he had the affair with after that. Whatever happened to a man who lost everything, it didn't matter to me now. My duty is to work hard for Naomi. Letting go of the past, I took the first step into a new life.